So friends, today I'm going to explain a very different type of film. It's unique, gripping, and full of shocking twists. And let me tell you this, you'll only be able to fully understand the mystery once you reach the very end. That's why you need to watch carefully till the last moment, because every single detail matters. The movie begins inside a dark forest, where we see a terrified girl running desperately through the trees. Her face is filled with panic and fear, as if something horrifying is chasing her. Somehow, she manages to escape the forest and reaches an old, isolated mansion. She thinks she'll be safe if she hides inside, but she's wrong, because the three people who were chasing her finally catch up, and they try to snatch her phone from her hands. Here we are introduced to Kevin, a boy who behaves aggressively with her, taunting her while trying to grab the phone. Just then, they all hear the sound of a piano playing from somewhere inside the mansion. Curious, they go to check it out and split up. Soon they find the piano, and strangely enough, it's playing on its own. At first, they assume someone might be behind this, but when they look closely, they notice a mouse running inside the piano. That could explain the keys being pressed, but then they realize the strings of the piano are broken, meaning the instrument couldn't possibly be producing sound. Still, they brush it off and decide to leave. But as they turn away, the piano keys start playing again, this time in a proper rhythm. One of the girls notices this and becomes visibly disturbed. Meanwhile, Kevin enters another room and finds an old wardrobe. From inside it, he hears strange noises. At the same time, the others begin hearing faint whispers. Kevin decides to check the wardrobe, and as soon as he opens it, a bunch of bats fly out, startling him. Though shaken, he pretends not to be afraid and begins to leave. But the moment he turns around, he feels something again, and this time, a dark force pulls him straight into the wardrobe. The scene then shifts, introducing us to Nick and Paul, two detectives who also happen to be childhood friends. They are meeting after many years. Nick tells Paul he expected Paul's juniors to show up instead, but Paul explains that he came personally because he knows this place well. He grew up here, knows the people, and believes he can handle the case better. For Paul, this mansion is tied to his childhood fears. The legends and stories of this place were something he grew up hearing, and now he wants to uncover the truth himself. From their conversation, we learn that as children, they used to visit this mansion along with their group of friends. The mansion had long been rumored to be haunted, and people claimed to hear whispers within its walls. Paul says that back then, it was whispers, and even now, it still whispers. Something evil was present then, and it's still here now. Nick, however, dismisses it all. He says he doesn't want to recall old memories, that these are just baseless stories, and insists this is nothing more than a simple murder case they've come to solve. The two detectives then enter the mansion. At this point, we get a glimpse of their childhood memories. We see young Nick, Paul, Sophie, Arthur, and Nick's younger brother visiting the mansion together. Arthur begins telling them about the mansion's history. He had even brought along some hidden archives from the library, which contained detailed records about this place. According to the documents, the mansion had been abandoned for over 100 years. Before that, it was home to an old lady who practiced incantations in the form of whispers. Through her strange rituals, she could heal people, but in return, she charged a heavy price. Eventually, something terrible happened. In a single night, everyone living in the mansion perished, except the old lady. People began calling her a witch, and after her death, the mansion became cursed. Anyone who enters still hears those same sinister whispers. They don't just frighten the soul, they tear it apart from the body, playing with the victim's death itself. The kids then make their way upstairs, to the very room where the old lady once lived. According to the archives, there had once been major construction work carried out here. Arthur believed that buried treasure could be hidden somewhere on the property, possibly gold that the old lady had once concealed. Excited by this idea, the kids began searching for it, and by luck, they hit the right spot. They discovered a box and were overjoyed, thinking it surely contained gold that would make them rich. But to their surprise, inside was no gold at all. Instead, it was an old phonograph, one of the earliest devices ever made to record and play back sound. Curious, they opened it and played it. Immediately, they heard the whispers of that same old lady's voice echoing from it. Disturbed, they quickly shut it off, wondering aloud who would have recorded such a thing. The only explanation they could come up with was that someone had tried to preserve her incantations by recording them. As they discussed this, Sophie happened to glance at the box itself, which had a mirror fixed on it. In that mirror, she suddenly saw the shadowy figure of the witch standing right behind her. Shocked and terrified, she stumbled, fell down the stairs, and lost consciousness. The story then shifts back to the present. Nick and Paul are investigating the case. They examined the very closet where the body had been discovered. The corpse had already been removed, but bloodstains were still visible inside. This meant the first victim, the one dragged into the closet earlier, was directly connected to this case. However, the autopsy report hadn't arrived yet, so the exact cause of death remained unknown. Another strange detail: the teens who had been there that night didn't report the incident until 7 hours after Kevin's death. According to them, they hadn't seen anything, no idea what happened or how. Nick, who personally knew the kids, insisted they were good people. He didn't believe they were lying, nor could he imagine them being responsible for such a crime. Leaving the mansion, Paul decided to check the forest nearby. There, he stumbled upon a keychain. To his shock, it belonged to his son, Luke. We're then shown another flashback, Paul with young Luke, driving through this very forest. Luke wasn't wearing his seatbelt that day. Suddenly, a child appeared in the middle of the road. Paul swerved the car to avoid hitting him, and the vehicle crashed. Luke was gravely injured in the accident, but when Paul looked back, the child who caused the crash wasn't there anymore. This trauma still haunted Paul every single day. Sitting back in his car now, he suddenly saw the same mysterious boy standing in front of him. Disturbed, Paul panicked until he realized no one was actually there. Shaken, he forced himself to calm down and drove away. Paul then visited Sophie's house, where he questioned her stepdaughter, Rihanna. Sophie explained her situation. She was now a widow, as her husband had passed away not long ago. Rihanna was her stepdaughter, the daughter from her husband's first marriage. And Rihanna, in fact, was the same girl we saw at the beginning of the story, the one running terrified through the forest before reaching the mansion. Nick sat down with Rihanna, her sister Julie, and Julie's boyfriend Ron to question them about what they had experienced inside the mansion. They said the same thing. They only heard whispers echoing all around them. This detail didn't surprise Paul at all, since he himself had experienced the same phenomenon in the past. He then asked them about the phonograph or the box. But according to the teens, they hadn't found any box nor seen anything unusual. Still unsatisfied, Paul pressed harder. That's when Rihanna admitted something. Once, outside the mansion, she had noticed a strange man watching her. Later, the same man followed her. She shouted at him, and he ran away. That man, she revealed, was Arthur, the historian. Paul immediately went to Arthur's house. Arthur had grown eccentric and deeply troubled, completely obsessed with researching the mansion, its deaths, and all the paranormal events tied to it. Nick and Paul questioned him about Rihanna, the mansion, and most importantly, the phonograph. Arthur initially denied having it, but Paul warned him. Either he told the truth and handed it over, or he would be arrested. Terrified, Arthur confessed, the phonograph was indeed with him, stored upstairs. He headed up to fetch it, but instead, he jumped out through the window and escaped. Right away, Paul called in a police team to search the place. During the search, they discovered a map of the mansion. Paul kept the mansion's map with him. Just then, Nick confronted him, warning that what he was doing wasn't right. Paul replied that Arthur was a suspect, and if he was innocent, he would be cleared. Nick pushed back, pointing out that Paul had been drinking, was depressed, and needed to focus on his actual work instead of chasing obsessions. But Paul snapped, saying he didn't need Nick's concerns. Meanwhile, Paul checked the autopsy reports. The doctor explained Kevin's body had scratches, a fractured spine, and wounds. But the shocking part, the official cause of death was literally fear. Kevin's heart had failed due to extreme terror. Even stranger, his eardrums were ruptured, something only possible from exposure to an extremely loud sound. Yet, according to witnesses, they had only heard whispers that night, no deafening screams or noise. Paul asked the doctor if Kevin's belongings included a mysterious box. The doctor went to check. At that exact moment, Kevin's supposedly lifeless body began to twitch on the table. Paul noticed it and stepped closer. Suddenly, the corpse grabbed him. From Kevin's dead mouth came a horrifying voice that declared it knew who Paul was. Then, with inhuman strength, it hurled Paul across the room. Shaken to his core, Paul stumbled away, deeply disturbed. Elsewhere, Rihanna was looking after her stepbrother Willie, Sophie's youngest son. But then she sensed something strange. Willie's toy started moving on its own. She put it aside, but it shifted again, making noise. She tossed aside its music box, yet the eerie sound still continued, growing louder and louder. Terrified, Rihanna panicked. Before anything worse could happen, Sophie entered, picked up Willie, and left the room. Rihanna tried to tell her what happened, but Sophie had no time to listen. Meanwhile, Paul kept being haunted by visions of his son Luke. Though struggling emotionally, he forced himself to hold it together. Later, he went to a bar where he ran into Sophie, who worked there. The two talked. Sophie revealed her late husband's first wife had gone mentally unstable and eventually committed suicide. As they talked further, Paul noticed the bracelet Sophie wore. It was the same one he had gifted her during childhood, and she still kept it after all these years. Paul was moved. He opened up about his past too. His wife had left him long ago, leaving him to raise Luke alone. After his mother's death, Paul and Luke had been returning to their old home when the tragic car accident happened. Luke had since been in a coma, his condition worsening for the last 2 months. Paul also mentioned something chilling. Before the crash, Luke claimed he saw a child on the road, yet the dash cam recorded nothing. No child had ever been there. Meanwhile, Ron visited Julie at her house. He tried to get intimate, but Julie, still grieving Kevin's death, pushed him away. Upset, Ron prepared to leave. Julie went into another room. Then Ron heard Julie's seductive voice calling him lovingly, urging him to come closer. Drawn in, he followed the sound down into the basement. But Julie wasn't there. Instead, he saw blood dripping onto the floor. Ahead, a body was being stitched together. Terrified, Ron stepped closer and realized it was Kevin's mutilated corpse being sewn up. Horrified, he staggered back. At the same time, Rihanna awoke from a nightmare, shaken and in tears. Sophie, however, scolded her harshly instead of comforting her, making Rihanna cry harder. This revealed Sophie wasn't exactly the kindest stepmother. Later, Paul tried to comfort Rihanna. She confided that she deeply missed her real mother and felt Sophie didn't see her as a true daughter. Paul reassured her, saying Sophie was just stressed and overworked at the bar, which explained her behavior. Paul then carefully asked about the night at the mansion. Rihanna revealed Julie often bullied her. Julie had stolen her diary, which contained Rihanna's secret. She liked Kevin. That same night, Kevin approached Rihanna, pretended to propose, and kissed her. But his real intention wasn't love. He secretly snapped inappropriate photos of her. Then he, Ron, and Julie began blackmailing her, threatening to leak the pictures. Desperate, Rihanna snatched Kevin's phone and ran. As she fled, she heard the eerie whispers growing louder and louder, surrounding her. But she was determined to protect her dignity, so she kept running. This, in fact, was the scene we saw at the very beginning of the story, her panicked run toward the mansion. Paul then asked if Arthur had been there that night. Rihanna firmly said no, he wasn't. Later, Paul stayed with Sophie. Their long-buried childhood feelings resurfaced and they kissed, eventually becoming intimate. Meanwhile, Rihanna, unable to sleep, heard strange noises again. She left the house quietly. At the same moment, Paul woke up noticing Paul was haunted by visions of rotting corpses, but he forced himself to stay in control. Just then, he and Sophie heard music playing somewhere in the mansion. Following the sound into the basement, they discovered Ron's phone, along with piles of human skin tissues. The next morning, the police launched an investigation. For now, everyone assumed Ron had simply gone missing. Maybe he had wandered off somewhere, since he hadn't returned home since last night. Later, Paul stayed close to Sophie. He asked Julie to hand over Rihanna's diary, and inside it he discovered a map. Shockingly, it was the same map Arthur had in his house. The map revealed a warehouse that connected to the mansion through an underground passage. Curious, Paul and Sophie searched the basement and actually found the hidden passage. Leaving Sophie behind, Paul pressed forward alone. As he moved deeper, the ghost of the young boy appeared, tormenting him once more. Then Paul stumbled upon Ron's dead body. Terrified, he pushed on, only to run into Rihanna, holding the phonograph in her hands while someone unseen behind her was combing her hair. Paul couldn't see who it was. Suddenly, Arthur arrived and pulled Rihanna away, taking her with him. Arthur then revealed the full truth. Together, they discovered an ancient altar, once used for sacrifices. Long ago, this place had been a temple devoted to Mara, the goddess of death. Worshippers would perform sacrifices before her. Mara thrived on fear, tormenting her victims by invading their nightmares before finally killing them. Her whispers summoned people into runes, sealing their fate. These whispers weren't just heard with the ears. They invaded the mind, delivering deep shocks, sometimes even pulling people out of their nightmares. Arthur explained that the old lady who once lived in this mansion had also been touched by Mara's whispers. At the end of her life, desperate for longevity, she sacrificed her own granddaughter at that very altar. She even recorded the ritual whispers onto the phonograph. Mara granted her longer life, yes, but Mara is death herself. Death never gives without taking. Along with life, Mara cursed her with terror and pain, demanding sacrifice in exchange. Ultimately, Mara, the goddess of death, wiped out everyone in the mansion. Overwhelmed by guilt and accused of being a witch, the old woman finally took her own life. In truth, she had been one, for she sacrificed her granddaughter to extend her own life. Even though she sometimes healed others, her deeds were dark. Arthur then revealed something shocking from the past. When Paul, Nick, Sophie, and the others were children and had first come to the mansion, Sophie had fallen. Her neck broke, and she died. Yes, Sophie had actually died back then. Nick and his brother Tommy had rushed to get an ambulance. In that moment, Paul believed the whispers could heal, so he played the phonograph. Sophie revived, but at a terrible cost. Mara took a life in exchange, Tommy's. He heard the whispers, panicked, ran into the road, and was struck by a car. Nick had always believed it was just an accident, but Arthur knew the truth, and this explained Paul's haunting visions. The boy he always saw was no stranger at all. It was Tommy, the child whose death Paul had unknowingly caused when he awakened the curse by reviving Sophie. The whispers didn't heal life, they twisted it. Sophie's decayed body in Paul's dreams was proof. She should have been long dead, but Mara's curse had kept her alive unnaturally. Arthur insisted. The phonograph must be destroyed. Burn it, end it, or Mara's wrath would consume everyone. No one could endure her terror. They tried to take the phonograph from Rihanna, but she resisted, crying that they must not destroy it. She even said she considered Mara her mother. Before they could act, Mara herself manifested, attacking with her deafening whispers. Now it was clear, she was the one behind all the deaths, including Kevin's. The whispers struck with brutal force. Paul writhed in agony, visions of Luke flooding his mind. In one desperate act, he fired his gun right beside his own ear, shocking himself back into clarity. Meanwhile, Rihanna grabbed the phonograph and fled. Paul hurried upstairs where Mara, possessing Sophie, was about to kill Sophie and Julie. Paul calmed her, breaking the possession while Sophie clung to him for strength. At that moment, Sophie revealed her own truth. She said that when she first came here with her father, she once heard her dead mother's voice calling to her. The voice led her through the underground passage where she found the phonograph along with scriptures. Her mother's voice told her, "Whisper, and I will return." So Sophie whispered. She records the whisper onto the phonograph, which brings her mother back. But in reality, it isn't her mother at all. It's actually Mara deceiving her. When Kevin had died, she was deeply hurt, saying this should never have happened, which means she knew exactly what had happened to Kevin. At this point, Paul calms her down, while Sophie consoles her too. Sophie promises that from now on, she will be a better mother, perhaps accepting that all of this happened because she had neglected her before. Paul then insists that this house itself is evil, and they must leave immediately. Mara only grows stronger by feeding on her victims, and she has already absorbed so much pain and suffering that even worse things are bound to happen. They all leave the house, but Paul secretly keeps the phonograph with him, because his true intention is to save Luke's life, and the only way he sees is by seeking Mara's help. That phonograph is his only option. Meanwhile, Nick arrives, having discovered the truth. Paul had never been sent here by anyone. He had come on his own, and the reason was clear: to save his son. He had been following Arthur all along only because of this. Nick gets angry at Paul, but Paul finally reveals the full truth and Sophie steps in to calm things down. Paul then shares another secret. The night Tommy died, he had tried to save him using the phonograph, but after playing it once, he felt something was very wrong. So, he decided to reverse it, playing it backwards. That's when Mara vanished. Everything stopped, and peace was restored. In fact, Nick was the one who had stopped everything. Yes, though he had wanted to save his brother, he had unknowingly saved everyone else too. He had realized how dangerous it was, which is why things remained quiet for so many years. But Mara needed new victims, and so she tricked Yana, using her as a way to return. And once Yana gave in, the cycle began again. After all, Mara, the goddess of death, only craves death itself. She feeds on souls, torments them, and becomes stronger. Just then, Sophie notices Yana and Willie are missing. She calls for Paul and Nick, and Paul immediately realizes that the phonograph is also gone. They rush downstairs and find Yana, now possessed, preparing to sacrifice Willie in order to bring her mother back. But Sophie manages to grab Willie and escape. At the same time, Mara arrives, haunting them once again. Paul manages to pull Yana out of the possession, and together they prepare to burn the phonograph. But Mara will never allow that. With her powerful whispers, she tortures them, trying to force Yana to hand it over. At the last moment, Yana realizes the truth. This is not her mother, and everything about this is wrong. She gives the phonograph to Paul. Immediately, Paul is dragged into one of Mara's nightmares. As I mentioned before, she plays with the mind, and here she tempts him. Save Luke's life, and in return, give me Willie's. But Paul refuses. He says Mara always wants to trap people into bargaining away someone else's life so the cycle can continue forever. But this time, he declares, the loop will end. Paul plays the phonograph and tells Yana to run. Then he sets everything on fire. The flames consume him along with the phonograph, destroying the whispers that had been trapped inside. And without the whispers, Mara, the goddess of death, can never return. In the final scene, we see Luke, shockingly, fully healed. Most likely, Paul had struck a final deal by sacrificing himself so Mara would restore his son. At the same time, though, the phonograph too has been completely destroyed. On the other side, Sophie and Julie are seen together. Their mother-daughter bond stronger than ever, preparing to leave the place for good. But then, Julie comes across Willie's toy. It starts to play, and from inside it, the same dreadful whispers can be heard. This means Mara is not truly gone. The whispers have now been indirectly trapped inside the toy, which also means the the real game of death is far from over. As long as the whispers remain, Mara will keep coming back. Boom! And with that, this movie finally comes to an end. So friends, this was the complete story. I hope you enjoyed it. I've already explained all the theories and everything that happened in detail. Let's quickly recap. Back in childhood, Paul, Nick's brother Tommy, and Sophie had once entered this very house. Something strange happened there. Sophie fell and actually died, but Paul unknowingly brought her back using the phonograph, and that's how Mara, the goddess of death, was awakened. Because of this, Mara indirectly claimed Tommy's life by causing his accident. Later, Nick too tried to bring his brother back, but he realized the truth. Since Sophie had been revived, bringing Tommy back would demand yet another sacrifice. So instead, he reversed the phonograph, which forced Mara to vanish. Years later, when Sophie's daughter Yana entered the house, she found that same phonograph hidden in the basement. She played it again, which led to Kevin's death. From then on, everything started again. Mara had indirectly possessed Yana, appearing to her in the form of her mother. And the simple reason was that Sophie had never truly accepted her daughter. She always scolded and neglected her. That's why all of this spiraled out of control. But in the end, we saw Paul sacrifice himself to save his son Luke. The phonograph was finally destroyed, but Mara's whispers got trapped inside Willie's toy. And as long as that toy exists, Mara will always have a way to return. And remember, all of this had started because of that mysterious old lady through whom Mara carried out her will. So friends, I hope the entire story now makes complete sense to you. If you enjoyed this breakdown, then don't just watch silently. Smash that like button right now because it really motivates me to bring you even more thrilling stories. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next twist-filled recap. Alright then, I'll be back very soon with another spine-chilling video. Until then, stay spooky and keep the likes coming.